and good afternoon, and welcome to August Fest. And I'm delighted to be joined by our unusual sleuth panel this afternoon, and that is Hendy, Kat Ailes, and Neil Daws. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So, unusual. Oh, I can't even get my words out. Unusual Sleuths is the name of our panel, and that is because the sleuths in your books are somewhat unconventional, I think you'll say. So would you like to start, Hannah, by introducing yourself and your sleuth and your books?
Yes, I'm Hannah Hendy. I write a series called The Dinner Lady Detectives, starring Marjorie and Clementine, who are a married couple in their 60s, and themselves and the Dinner Lady team solve the murders. Or try to.
And Kat, did you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Kat Ailes. I have just published the first of my series, which is The Expectant Detectives, and it is a bunch of pregnant women in the Cotswolds who get dragged into solving a murder that happens at their antenatal class. And my main sleuth is Alice, who is a sort of down from London, just moved from London to the Cotswolds.
And Neil.
Hello, Neil Daws, and I write the Kember and Hayes mysteries, which is about a Scotland Yard detective who's seconded to a town in Kent, and he meets an air transport auxiliary pilot called Lizzie Hayes, and she's also got a degree in psychology, one of the few women who had one of those at the time. And she brings to this investigation her unusual way of profiling, when in an age when men weren't profiling, let alone women. I mean, you can excluding Sherlock Holmes, of course. And so what they do is there's a murder in a village nearby Tunbridge, and he gets sent to investigate that. Starts to get mixed up with Lizzie, and then they realise that actually, even though they're a bit spiky with each other, they've each got a different perspective to bring to the investigation, and then have a grudging respect for each other, and have end up, hopefully, if you've not read the first book completely yet, solving the case. And books 2 and 3 are in a similar vein. The book 2 is largely set in the same village, but book 3 is set in a Kent coal mine.
Wow. I mean, I loved when we first talked about putting this panel together. I love the unusual sleuth. So I was actually reading your book, Kat, at the time when we were talking about it, and I was like, right, okay, so where can we get this? So do you when you think about sort of your unusual sleuths, what inspired you? Was it the unconventionalness of the sleuth that attracted to you them, or something else? Who wants to go first? I'm happy for anybody to go. Hannah, I'll pick you. Sorry.
I think I just like quirky characters. I like writing interesting people. Hopefully not boring people, if you know what I mean. I think like in my day-to-day life, like working as a chef, you meet a lot of people, especially now, like I do weddings and stuff, meet loads of different people, and I just like, I think it's a bit more interesting when they're a bit different. Sorry, that's really boring.
No, I think it's because, I mean, if you think about sort of unusual sleuths in history, sort of, if you think about Miss Marple, she's an old lady, but she is unconventional because she's an old lady who, watches the world go by. So actually, although they are unconventional sleuths, they're quite conventional people. And I guess in some ways, I mean, obviously maybe yours not so much, Neil, because she's quite unique. But with Hannah's and Kat's character. So Kat, do you want to say, what do you think about yours when you what made you decide to write about pregnant women being detectives?
I mean, I was pregnant at the time. And so I had quite an insight into that mindset. I'm also very, very pregnant now. So having another baby.
Oh, are you?
So I stuck this in just before Jamie arrives. So I was in that mindset of being pregnant, and I think I found it a little bit frustrating being pregnant in that you're often sort of underestimated at what you can do. And I've come across that in various guises, you know, as a woman, like, you know, you are quite often sort of underestimated. And actually, that was one thing that jumped out at me about all three of us, our sleuths. They're all women who are underestimated. And I think that puts them in such an interesting position when it comes to like solving a crime or something, because these are people who, so Clementine and Marjorie, you know, they're women in their 60s, which is a time when like professionally women are often underestimated, and also in all sorts of areas of life. And then obviously Lizzie in your books, Neil, obviously historically, like that's a time when women just basically were underestimated in pretty much every single area. But like also because she's academic, and like I think women in academia, that's probably still a place where women are underestimated. And then I was interested in just like a woman in her like early 30s, pregnant, you know, your brain is still functioning, like you can still do things, you can still think. And so I wanted to just investigate that a little bit, I think. So that's kind of where
really
it
interesting,
out of.
Because I think even like historically, if you think about, you know, you sort of Miss Marples, and she's very, you know, when she rocks up, doesn't she, at a crime scene, you know, you in the beginning it's always like, oh, little old lady, she doesn't really know what she's doing. Again, underestimated. But yeah, like all of your characters, they should not be underestimated. Neil, what about you? What do you?
Well, the idea for Lizzie came from a newspaper cutting. I can't remember which newspaper it was in, but it was to do with the female top guns in Afghanistan flying fast Tornado jets. And I put it away thinking there's got to be a story there somewhere. Then my mother-in-law, who lives in Granny Annex next door, said, you might like this. And she showed me another article in one of her women's magazines that was about Joy Lofthouse, who is this woman here. And she was flying planes for the Air Transport Auxiliary during the war, which meant that they were flying from the factories to the front line, from the front line to the repair shops, back to the factories. And I thought, that sounds an even better story, because if I set a crime back then, there's little in the way of forensic science, and fingerprinting is there, but they've only just discovering blood typing and rhesus typing and all that kind of thing. So I'll look into that a bit more. And went online and found that she was appearing at Shoreham in Kent, not where the air crash was, but a different place. And there was a little Battle of Britain or Air War museum there. And I went along to see her, and ended up, after everyone else had these kind of prints signed, and I spoke to her for another half an hour, and she was telling me stories like they weren't allowed to fly on instruments because they were never taught. They taught themselves. They got other people to teach them, but officially they were never taught. And there were loads of things that they weren't supposed to do. And one of the things was they weren't supposed to fly above a certain height. They had to fly below cloud, but above telephone wires and that kind of thing. And a very narrow place. She said quite often they were shot at by their own people, shot at by the enemy. The weather would force them down, or something wrong with the plane would force them down. So she would always fly to a US airbase rather than a British airbase, because you got tea and biscuits at British airbase, you got chocolate, nylons, lots of attention, wine, and everything else at a US airbase. And I thought, I think I found my character here. And she was going to be a sole sleuth, but I had another detective from a previous attempt at writing that I brought forward because I thought, if there's a murder, it's going to be all over with Scotland Yard detectives. I didn't want Scotland Yard there particularly because they just take over everything. And I found a case a few miles away from where mine is actually set, and actually on the day mine is set, that it was a triple murder in Brenchley Parish, and it took all the resources of Tunbridge Police, plus a couple of Scotland Yard detectives. One of the preeminent pathologists at the time came down and did the pathology over at Pembury Hospital. And I didn't want that, so I had all that going on, so that my detective was then kind of, well, you're the only one left, and you're a Scotland Yard detective, aren't you? Go and do it. And that's when he meets Lizzie, and where she brings her skills is that's what makes Lizzie, or brings Lizzie to that part of the world and him. But the quirky part of it was that I found a woman called Beatrice Edgill, who I think was probably the first person or first woman to get a PhD in psychology, and she had to do it abroad. Then she came and worked in Bedford College, which was part of University College London. And it just worked, the timing worked, that if Lizzie has a PhD in psychology, her mentor would be Beatrice Edgill. So I anchored it in reality. And if there are any other, cool. If there are any future books, I may get her going to see Beatrice to kind of talk through a case with a mentor, but that's for the future. But that's how she got her PhD. But I also brought in some other quirky bits. Stop me if I'm hogging the thing here. I brought in some other quirky bits because I thought the original ATA was nicknamed Ancient and Tattered Airmen, because there was one guy who flew with one eye. They all had medical issues or psychological issues. They were all too old or too infirm or injured in some way that they couldn't fly in the RAF, so they gave them this job instead. And one guy even had one leg, and he used to not one leg, one arm, and he used to steer with his feet, steer with his feet, but then have the column between his knees and do the power with his good arm. So he was flying with one arm most of the time, or all the time, because one was so poorly sighted he could hardly see. But when the women came along, they called them Always Terrified Air Women, because they thought they would break their airplanes because they were only women, weren't they? So I thought, if I give her a little bit of anxiety, a soupçon of OCD, she can kind of fit into that outcast kind of group, and add to the fact that she's got OCD, she's got anxiety and panic attacks, she's a woman in a man's world, all these kind of things set up extra conflict for her, whereas my detective has only got, I need to solve the case, don't I? There you go.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. I'm looking at the questions that are coming in. They are flying in, so I'm going to read some of them. So Hannah, somebody said, do you mean you base characters off people that you meet in real life, actually, which was going to be one of my questions for you all in a minute, so we could just do that one now. So obviously, yes, Neil, you definitely did. And Hannah, are your dinner ladies based on anybody? Are they based on anybody that
a mix of people that I've met, I think? Not just like one person, but like the in the first book, the very elderly kitchen manager in the first book who is unfortunately murdered. She's just a mix of like every kitchen manager I've ever had. And
so you had to kill them off.
Which is like, and I had people be like, God, she's over the top and like she plays these horrible jokes, and I was like, yeah, but that's what kitchen managers do. So definitely, like, and I try not to have like someone who's really recognizable
noticeably.
So I don't want to get sued, but especially like when you meet like a big character in real life, you might take like a little bit of their personality for a character.
Is that and was that true did you go to antenatal, Kat, when you were was there anybody in your antenatal? Well, obviously not really in your antenatal class, but we've all, well, I've been to antenatal classes, and I'm sure there was somebody, some in mind that I would have maybe, obviously it might be difficult because it might be people watching, but.
I mean, yes. So I moved from London to the Cotswolds when I was 8 months pregnant, and we joined an antenatal class, and that's literally how my first
you are
book
Alice.
a little bit, not entirely. So yeah, it very much sort of grew out of my own experience. But you know, in my book, the first antenatal class, someone gives birth, and in the sort of ensuing commotion that happens with a birth, someone is also murdered downstairs, and obviously none of that happened at my antenatal class. It's much more boring. But I mean, yes, I have, you know, pilfered bits from people that I've met and things that have happened to me. Actually, the most nervous I was when the book came out was my old NCT teacher messaged me, and she was like, "I've just bought your book. I'm going to read it." And there's an NCT teacher in the book, obviously,
Yeah.
and she's like a bit of a character, and I was just like, "Please don't think this is based on you." Like, I was so nervous that she'd be really offended. But she recommended the book to her book group, so I'm guessing she's either doesn't recognize herself in it or was flattered. Who knows? I don't know. But yeah, so I have stolen bits from people, but with certain sort of areas, I so deliberately steered away. So like, the main character's parents are nothing like my parents. Her boyfriend is nothing like my boyfriend, and especially like there's a whole sort of parents-in-law, like mother-in-law storyline that runs through, and I was very careful to just steer that sort of 6 million miles away from my own in-laws. But the one character that is completely true to life is the dog, Helen. So Helen is just like 100% my dog, and has turned out to be pretty much every reviewer's sort of favorite character, which I don't know. I'm like, oh, that's nice, and then I'm like, I don't really know what that says about my human characters, but yeah, the dog seems to have gone down very well. So that is just my dog.
I think animal characters always do, really. I think if you have, I think I was reading, I can't remember the book I read, was a book I read recently that had a cat in it, and the cat was like, you know, the cat was obviously like a side character, but actually in all the reviews, everybody was saying, "Oh, I love the cat," which must be
the cat
like
called
when
the
you
killer.
put all. I
The cat that
can't
called the
remember.
killer,
I think
was that
it might have been. I can't remember. I honestly read so much that I'd like, sometimes it just, they do blur, but it was, and somebody, oh no, it wasn't. It was the book. Oh, she called Sam. It was the birthday party, and it had a cat in it, and it was like set in like a stately home. Somebody remind me in a minute on the chat. I interviewed her. She was one of my first chats on here, and the character was, this black cat that was in the book was quite a prominent part of the reviews. Oh, Hannah has a cat in her books, Pumpkin.
Yeah, she's based on a real cat.
And does she get love in the reviews?
Yeah, well, yeah, and but yeah, unfortunately she passed away before the book came out. She was really, really old. She was 16.
No.
But the other cat there's another cat a bit later on, and that's also based on my cat. I just keep adding cats. It's fine.
It's impossible not to. If you have a cat, they're like such a major part of your life. Yeah. They're gonna ease their way into every corner of your life.
I have a cat. She may appear at some stage in another guise.
I have to shut the door when I'm on here because she's fascinated. She comes in and sits by the door and waits to go. So what are you doing? Why are you talking to that screen?
I've had to send my dog away. I've had to send my husband, my toddler, and my dog. I was like, you all have to leave the house. Because the dog would be sort of on my lap. Aww. Probably the child as well.
So it was Sam Blake's Mystery of Four. And Laura says she was guilty of loving the cat in the book as well. So I think it was, I mean, she was a lovely cat. It was good. I'm getting some other comments. So pregnant women and older women, which actually is relevant to your books and yours, Neil, are often invisible to many people. Not so you were saying about, you know, the characters of, they're not older than, but women. Actually, all of your characters love these kinds of sleuths. One of the questions I was going to ask was, like, sort of unusual, unconventional sleuths have been, you know, sort of quite prominent in fiction for quite a long time, you know, sort of thinking, going back to the golden age of crime. And somebody in the chat has said about why has there been a rise, and I think maybe it was, you know, they sort of had a bit of a, they're having a bit of a renaissance now, aren't they? So if thinking about sleuths from other authors, do you have a favorite that you wish you'd written, that you'd created? Hannah's not had Agatha Raisin.
I love Agatha Raisin. My agent used to work for the publisher that MC Beaton wrote for, and she said she met her once and she seemed really cool. I'm so jealous.
She is a good one. Neil, have you got one?
Well, I suppose that having read all the Sherlock Holmes books as a kid, I'd love to have written Sherlock Holmes, or rather, I'd have liked him not to have written Sherlock Holmes and then me to come along and written Sherlock Holmes. But I mean, you know, every book you read, you know, if it's got a good sleuth in it, you think, oh, I wish I'd written that one. I mean, I'm reading Mark Billingham's The Last Dance at the moment, and Detective Miller. I wish I'd thought of that first, kind of thing. So yeah, each book brings a different. Wish I could.
Yeah.
I mean, my detective, as I said, is a seconded Scotland Yard detective. That's because of something that's happened in his career, and they've kind of farmed him out for a bit to get rid of him. But I used to work with a whole host of what I call quirky cops. They don't like me calling them quirky cops, but you know, if you were to meet them, you think, oh, okay, I understand what he's talking about now. Because we worked I worked with them in a government department dealing with counter-terrorism. It was the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism. So all the people with long careers and lateral thinking came to us. And they often say, oh, is that based on me? And I go, well, no. But if you can see yourself in it, you're probably a little bit right. Because I've taken bits of all of them to shove in there. And again, with the sergeant in the village, he's based on an amalgamation of two of the police that I worked with. So yeah, like Kat was saying earlier, you just grab bits of everyone that you've met, the interesting bits, and see if they fit together.
Because one thing we were talking about before we came online was other jobs. So Hannah and Kat, I didn't actually, because it was just before you joined, Neil, but we were talking about, so are you a full-time writer now? Is that your sort of day job? But Kat and Hannah, it's like their part-time job as well.
Well, it was a part-time job for about 30 years, trying to write stuff and try and get it published, trying to get people interested.
Juggle together.
Yeah, you know, writing everything, stage plays, film scripts, stuff for BBC, everything that I could think of, and always getting rejected. And then finally, I managed to make the breakthrough. But that didn't happen until after I took early retirement. There was an opportunity to have an early release scheme, pay off the mortgage, and financially that meant that I would break even. My wife was and still is working, but financially we'd be on an even keel. So I said, well, I'll do that and I'll try and have a go at writing. She said, I'll give you a year and then get a job. 2 years later, I joined a writing group, Curtis Brown. That led me to enter the Blue Pencil Agency competition, where I came third, and that's where I met Nell, my agent. So if I'd have given up in that first year, I'd have never have made it. And they say that, you know, all the successful people are the ones that didn't give up and kept going and were bloody minded about it. And so, you know, that's what I've been, I think, in recent years. But it does give me the luxury of writing full time. So even though I've come to the end of my current 3-book contract. I've already written something else. I've signed a contract for 2 different books, which I can't say anything about yet. I've got another idea for a series, which in those gaps in between, I'll write. But I could never have done that or do this if I was still working, because I used to write on the train into work, type it up in lunchtime, send it home, write a bit more, and then edit in the evening, and then try and do some family stuff in the weekends. But how you would do that, Kat, while you're pregnant as well, and all the things extra things that brings with it, I'm in awe of that, I'm afraid.
I only do 2 days or 3 days a week now, catering, and it's kind of a bit more because I love it too much to give it up.
Well, that's nice, isn't it, that you can do both? I think
it's really easy. I think catering goes quite well with it. I don't think I couldn't do the job I do now full time, because it's like I work, like yesterday I worked 14 hours, just because it's catering. But I do 2 days a week, so that's like, this. I'm still doing. I'm still pretty much doing full-time jobs someday. When I do 3 days, I do 40 hours pretty much. But but then I've got 3 or 4 days in the week just to write. With the series, it's just because I've got another 4 books to do. So, sorry, no.
Wow.
No, I'm on book 5 now. So I've got. I'm halfway through book 5, and then I've got 2 more in the series.
So that was talking about that leads me nicely onto the next, which is series. So, Neil, obviously you've done the 3. Is that the end of Lizzie, or could Lizzie carry on if you wanted her to? Can you not? Is that going to be a big spoiler?
It's the end of Lizzie and Kemba at the moment. Whether they'll return in the future, I don't know. If they do, I've got stories for them, and they're not stories that I could easily adapt to another time frame. They're set within that time and the events that happen during the war, because the 3 books are set during the first 2 are the first is the Battle of Britain, the second is coming up to the Winter Blitz, and then the 3rd one is after Amy Johnson has just recently died. She crashed in the Thames near Herne Bay. So that each story is a standalone, but they read in a series, you get more of a rich experience out of it, and there could be more. I hope there will be more, but we'll see. But in the other things that I'm going to work on and thinking of working on are also series, because most of the books that I've read that I've really enjoyed, I thought at the end, I really wish I'd read another book of theirs. And if it's a standalone, you can't go back. You have to reread that to get the experience again.
Yeah.
Also, of course, you don't have to invent new characters. You can just invent the peripheral characters, or bring in some new characters to expand that world, and that we facilitate whatever murder or crime that you've got in that particular book. So I like that center strand of characters that I can bring back and develop their character over a longer arc. But each book and each 2 or 3 books will have its own set of arcs.
I found that continuity. Sorry.
Okay, no, you carry on.
I was just saying, I've literally this afternoon I was wrapping up the edits on the 2nd book in my series, and I've got to say I found that continuity of characters such a blessing, because the world is created, the characters are like fully formed in your mind. It's so much easier going into book 2 than book 1. I mean, my book 1 was like, it was just a sort of messy explosion at first, not least because I had to write the first book in 3 weeks due to not reading the small print on a competition that I entered. So the first book was just like this panicked sort of creation of like a world and characters, and then you got to have a plot and all that kind of thing. And then the second one, you're sort of like, okay, I sort of know roughly where
You
I
know
am.
them.
That's been, yeah.
And
It's
you-
like
yeah.
revisiting old friends. It's rather lovely.
And is that the same for you, Hannah? Are you?
I've got too many characters now.
Just kill some of them off.
Favorites, and I keep bringing all these people back, and then I'm like, oh, now every time there's a new character, you're going to be like, oh, that's definitely the murderer. You know, the next there's like 55 other characters. Yeah, but the world building and stuff is kind of already built for you. And then in book 3, I took them out and put them somewhere else, and they went on holiday somewhere else. So sometimes that's fun to do. Just change
you moved their world to somewhere else.
Yeah, I just took all of them and then we're going on a bus somewhere else now.
I can't believe, Kat, that you're like having a baby and finishing the edits on your book.
It's been a busy few weeks. Yeah, no, I started my maternity leave 2 weeks ago, and all my colleagues were like, "Oh yeah, go and watch Netflix and put your feet up." And I was like, "I've got the US proofs to sort out for the first bit because it doesn't come out in America until January, and then I've got the edits for book 2, and then so it's and it's kind of one of those deadlines you can't move having a baby. So
yeah. They have a tendency of coming out regardless of whether you want them to or not.
Yeah, they don't care what else you might have going on. So
have they not read the contract?
Yeah, they didn't read the small print. They're not really interested. We were saying that, so Kat is an editor, which we were like saying that must be so interesting, or we were saying how terrifying it would be so like basically Kat tells everybody else how to edit their books, and now she has it on the other foot. But
yeah, I've got to sort of, I've been dishing it out for the last sort of 10 years, and now I've got to take it myself. It is kind of weird, but luckily I work on very different books. So in my I want to call it in my professional life, but I suppose that they're sort of both my professional life. But in my sort of day-to-day job, I edit like quite serious, like non-fiction, like politics and history and that kind of thing. And then what I've written is like cozy crime, comedy, like it's very light and it's just a million miles apart, which I think is good.
I think talking like sort of linking it into that sort of cozy crime is that I think people that definitely that's sort of the character, people knowing their characters and being able to pick a book up from a series where you know what the characters are and what they're going to do is quite reassuring in a sort of uncertain time, isn't it? I think people quite like to go back to, I mean, if you think about sort of series of old, like Sherlock, you said about Sherlock Holmes, Neil, or Agatha Christie, people return to those books over and over again because they know what's, you don't read it once you've read them once, you don't read them again for the sort of the climax. You read them because of the characters and how clever they're written, and I think there's something really nice about that. Do you sort of think that when you're writing, do you sort of think, it sort of feels like that?
I think there has been a huge upswing in the sort of the cozier end of the crime spectrum, basically since sort of COVID and since everything went a little bit mad in the real world. People are looking for reassurance and comfort in fiction, and I think in crime fiction, if you have that sort of cozy crime or that golden era crime, you get the sort of the thrill of the jeopardy and the like trying to work it, as the reader trying to get there before the author tells you, and so there's the sort of the mental workout and all of that. But at the same time, with the cozier end of the crime spectrum, I think it adds that sort of reassurance, which often I think comes from the sleuths themselves. Like if you look at like the Richard Osman phenomenon, which has just changed the sort of crime writing stage, really. They're such lovely characters. I mean, who wouldn't want to go for like a cup of tea with Joyce? Like, it's just it's just a lovely world to inhabit, despite the fact that, you know, they're running around after international sort of criminals and murderers, but yet it feels comforting and safe because of who your main characters are.
He's such a lovely bloke and so talented. I hate him.
I think most people do. I think that he's like one of those people that everybody loves, but he is so nice, isn't he? But also he is so successful as well. You know, he's
so good.
Books, yeah, I don't know anybody who hasn't read them. You know, people that I know that don't read have read them. So you're like, well, you know, that's a sign of a, you know, that's a success, isn't it? When someone, you know, that who just doesn't pick a book up, picks up, you know, and reads them as a series. So
yeah.
At Harrogate, I think it was last year, there was a Twitter message came out saying, go to the bar and say Elizabeth sent me and you'll get a pint. And so he did, everyone did. And then he tweeted again saying, well, I should have realised that crime writers would drink the bar dry. So I put some more money behind the bar.
Oh,
Say Elizabeth sent you. So I did eventually get a pint out of him.
Oh, he did that this year as well.
Nice.
Yeah. So on the cozy crime thing, mine, I didn't envisage mine being cozy crime. I described it as just a historical crime thriller to start with. But then it was pointed out to me that it's a closed environment in a village and an air station, and the third book is in a coal mine, going back to Hannah taking them out of their one world into another. So my two sleuths go off to a completely different part of Kent to do that thing. But then there's like a comedy sergeant, not comedy sergeant, but he brings in some humour. There's Mrs. Garner, who's in the gossip circle. She's leading all the kind of misdirection going on. And then there's the air station itself, which has got a finite number of characters. And because of the period it's set in, everyone's immediately even though it's not set in Golden Age territory, everyone thinks, it's got to be cozy then. So I've hit all these, I've hit 80% of the cozy crime markers. But originally, when I was banding it around, somebody said that it was like Foyle's War meets Wire in the Blood. It was tamed down a bit after that because my agent said you can't do that to women and describe it in detail. So that's when I switched it to do it from the woman's perspective as they were being killed. And that took out all that description of what the killer was seeing, because originally it was from the killer's perspective. So I just wondered if, Kat and Hannah, did you deliberately go into that cozy world, or was it by accident?
That's just what I write. That's what's in my brain, I think.
Mine was a bit skewed because I wrote the beginning of mine as I just got advertised on Instagram, like the Comedy Women in Print prize. So I wrote the first, and they said, "Oh, submit 5,000 words of your book." And so I wrote the first 5,000 words like as a comedy rather than as a. I mean, it was still a murder mystery, but very heavily skewed towards the comedy. And so that was kind of why I ended up in that particular area. But also, I mean, the crime that I sort of read and watch is definitely more at the cozy end. It's Midsummer Murders and Death in Paradise and Father Brown, and and then it's
love all of those.
Then on the reading side, I think it's more of the golden age. It's like Gladys Mitchell and then and Agatha Christie and Marjorie Allingham and stuff like that. So I think you sort of tend to write what you read to a certain extent, I guess.
True.
That sounds like my TV and my reading. That's both of. Yeah, I mean, I think actually I hadn't thought about it in that sort of thing about COVID, but I actually think the more I talk to authors about what they wrote in COVID, but actually what's come out of COVID has actually been really interesting, because there's been quite a lot of claustrophobic sort of thrillers that have come out of COVID, but also on the other scale, you've got sort of the cozier books, because people wanted that comfort, I think. So they sort of went into what they knew. So it's a really interesting dynamic with the writing. So I think it's either gone one way or the other. It's gone like really sort of claustrophobically stuck on an island with the murderer coming for you, or the sort of more gentle sort of, I say gentle murdering, I'm not sure there is a thing, is there really? What do you think think's one of the most important factors in a good sleuth?
Nosiness.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm thinking Miss Marple in that one.
Gosh, that's quite a tricky question. I mean, I definitely agree with nosiness. My main character is constantly being told that she's just like really nosy, which we all are. We're all just interested in like other people, aren't we? So
people are interested in people, aren't they? That's exactly the thing. Yeah.
I think for me, I want my sleuth to be likable, because I know there is a whole other genre of like the quite unlikable sleuth, or the unlikable main character, or the unlikable narrator, and I can take so much of that. But if I'm going to really spend time in the company of a character, I just need them to be likable, really.
Yeah, especially on a series.
They can't be too arrogant. They've got to have some kind of vulnerability or flaw about them, so that the armchair sleuth who's reading the book can identify a little bit with that person. If they're always solving it instantly. I mean, Sherlock Holmes obviously is a little bit different, because that's just completely on a different level. If you have someone who's solving it within 5 or 10 minutes, got everything right, knows everything inside out, it doesn't give you much of a story. Also, you start thinking, well, I don't like you very much. So you've got to have somebody who's nosy but likable, a bit vulnerable, a flaw here and there. It doesn't have to be an absolute drunk, like there's a whole host of drunken sleuths at one stage.
I was thinking about those sort of dysfunctional cops. I was thinking of, there's several of them, isn't there?
I think that sort of before we had this like phase of sort of unconventional sleuths, there was such a trend for like the troubled sleuth. There was always like a, or their partner had just left them and they turned to drink or drugs, or they had like some sort of horrific backstory. And in some instances, it just got a bit much. Like you'd be reading this book and you're like, how is this person even functioning, let alone a level where they're like solving all these mysteries? It's all balance, isn't it?
Because like if you think back to like Morse and Endeavour and I'm thinking about Strike and all those, they've all got the sort of drink problems, and I imagine that there is a certain amount of that within the real world, because I imagine it's a really stressful job. But actually I think that's what the unconventional sleuth maybe doesn't have. That they have stresses, but not the same stresses as someone who was working in a high profile sort of police career would have.
Yeah, so and I think that unconventional sleuth, you have quite often it allows the writer to bring in elements of their life that are not just, they solve mysteries. Like, if it's like a police drama, then quite often what they do is policing, and that is the majority of their character. Whereas with an unconventional sleuth, so like Marjorie and Clementine, you've got this whole sort of the story of like their relationship and like what's going on between the two of them. And with like Lizzie's got so much going on, like with her academic work and like the flying and all of that. So I think it allows you to in a way build like bigger characters that aren't just defined by their detective work and their sort of troubles.
Well, Lizzie has got the issues with anxiety and OCD, because it forms part of this this way that she sees, or not sees. I mean, she's not psychic or anything, but the way she kind of works through a problem is aided in a way by the issues that she has. And also, she has to keep that concealed. Eventually, she reveals that to Kemba, because it's part of the way she's helping him out. But if you've got OCD, you were put in a hospital somewhere to because why have you got that? They wanted to study you. If you've got anxiety, you can't fly a plane because you're going to crash it, aren't you? This is quite apart from the fact that a lot of men had PTSD from the second bombing raid because of what they were experiencing. They were dosed up on amphetamines to keep them awake all the time, which then later gave them mental issues. So these anxiety and OCD is not really classed as a mental illness. They are psychological conditions. But back then, you would have just been shuttled away, locked up, either forgotten about or prodded and poked and studied. So that's part of her character too. It helps what she does, but also she has to keep it concealed from the men who would then take her away from what she's loving doing.
Although it's quite interesting, I thought, in the first book as well, like she encounters a fair bit of cruelty from, not from all of the other women, but particularly from Fizz, one of the other women, who isn't particularly sympathetic to Lizzie's sort of tics. So yeah, it doesn't all just come from there.
Well, I've found that a lot, that to a large degree, I think men will look at another man and go, yeah, all right, it's a bloke. But if you, I used to commute quite a lot. I used to commute every day into London, and standing on the platform, okay, train's delayed 5 minutes. Okay, you stand there and you look around, you put your newspaper away, you're waiting to get on the train, and you're just looking at other people, and a woman walks by. A man might look at that woman and go, attractive. A woman looks at it and goes, don't like her hair. Why is she wearing that? How is she walking in those heels? She could do with losing a bit of weight. And they're so much more critical, I've found, in the, because my father died a long time ago, and my wife's parents were divorced. So I've had my mum, mother-in-law, wife, 2 daughters, and even my cat is female. So I've been surrounded by females, and the way they rip each other, the way they rip other women's clothes and things apart can be quite vicious sometimes. I mean, not my girls and that is per se, but women in general, I think, are much more critical of other women. Whereas a man will go, "Why'd you buy that suit, mate?" and then go on and go for a pint. And that's it.
I think women are critical of themselves as well. I think that's probably
self-critical as well.
More of it as well is that we are very critical of ourselves. So therefore, we don't feel, maybe it's not so difficult to be critical of another woman because we can do it to ourselves, if that makes sense. Do you agree with that, Kat and Hannah?
Well, I think because we've been taught to be self-critical from a very young age, I think.
Yeah.
Which is,
True.
I think there's a lot happening now, to address, to redress that in society. But certainly my generation still, the magazines that we grew up with are like shocking when you look back now, like things like The Circle of Shame, and you just think, how was that allowed to be a thing? And that in beds. Sorry?
I think times are changing. I think Gen Z, they've kind of got a much better idea.
Yeah,
I was I've got a niece who's 14, and I was terrified of her reading the sort of magazines because the body image thing is so, and I think that's, as you were saying about, we are critical of other people, of each other, and social media and things have had a big sort of impact on that. And it's, it is hopefully, as you say, Hannah, things are becoming better, and maybe that's why we're all turning to cozy crime, because everybody's nice to each other. Well, they're not nice to each other, but they sort of, if you're just going to be nice to someone, you can just sort of like kill them off and move on.
Or golden age crime. If you go back to golden age, then you don't have to deal with the whole social media.
True.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I was going to say, because so Neil's book is set is in the 40s, so you don't obviously have to deal with social media. So is it difficult writing as a contemporary when you have to sort of account for, or I know some authors will say, well, I'm only going to write from 1980 backwards because I can't deal with all the
yeah, it's really hard when so much information is at anyone's fingertips now, because you think, oh, we'll just Google it. Which I really recently read the Dahlia Mysteries by Katie Watson, and she's done something very clever in that they're contemporary, but they're like based around like like sort of a fan world of like a golden era crime fictional series, and so in her first book they're at like a convention, and she makes all the characters all have to hand in their mobile phones at the very beginning of the book, so they don't have access to the internet, they don't have social media, and it makes things there's a whole lot you can do that you just can't do if the reader is sitting there going, well, that would be on the internet, like just Google them.
The students in my book that's coming out in October want Marjorie and Clementine to star in their TikTok page. So there's a whole thing with TikTok in the new book. I thought, because it's like you're saying, it's difficult, but also it's fun to embrace it and see, well, how can I write around that?
Yeah, I've built in the second book. I've had to build sort of Instagram into the story. So are Marjorie and Clementine going to go on social media? Are they going to have their
they might end up on a podcast. That's all I'll say.
Okay, I can see
they're not going to become influencers.
I can imagine Clementine is going to be really good on a podcast because having a captive audience, I think that's her jam. Really.
Have you seen Only Murders in the Building?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah. You going back
good
to what you were saying earlier about cozy crime explosion possibly coming out of the fact that COVID was so horrendous. Here's one for the future. I read today that 2 cases of bubonic plague have been found in Mongolia.
Wow.
So that's the next one.
keeping it classic there, aren't we? I suppose. The old school illnesses.
Yeah, get your stories ready now, please.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the hour has like flown by, and we're coming to the end of the hour. So I'll do some quick fires. Okay. So favorite crime writer, and how have they influenced you? Or have they influenced you?
Can I go for it? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go first.
Kind of sort of slightly. It's still crime, but it's middle grade crime, which we've sort of not talked about. But Robin Stevens writes this amazing.
The unlikely
Murder Most Unladylike.
That's it. Yeah,
I absolutely love those. So I'd put a vote in for them. Another golden era one. So
yeah.
The ones I've been reading recently are by Abia Mukherjee.
Yeah.
The was it Banerjee and Wyndham?
Yeah. Oh, they're great.
And the other one, his mate Vaseem Khan, Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra. I haven't read his other new series yet, but I like both of those. But the one that influenced me really to write kind of in the style that I do is not cozy crime author at all. It's Alistair MacLean, who was a thriller writer. Because I've watched things like Guns of Navarone and Where Eagles Dare and things like that, which were great films, but they were made from his books. And I've got 3 of his books up there. One is HMS Ulysses, which is about his it's a fictional it's a novel, crime novel, based on a ship in the North Atlantic, in the Russian convoys. Bear Island, which was turned into a terrible film, but it's about Nazi gold and trying to steal that. And South by Java Head, where they're evacuating Singapore. So they're kind of, those first 3 are war stories, but he went on for a number of years and wrote all sorts of different crime stories set in the oil fields of Alaska, all over the place in all different areas. But I liked his style of describing. He was very good at describing sea scenes. That was his forte because he'd been a sailor. And so I kind of tried to originally model myself on him very badly. But he's been an influence in the past that I want to inject adventure and excitement, even in small doses, in a cozy crime.
Fantastic. Hannah?
MC Beaton, obviously. But I think when I was very young and I used to go stay at my nan and grandpa's house, I used to read all of her Patricia Cornwell's. I think, when I was probably way too young. So I think that's maybe where the love of crime fiction and stuff comes from.
I used to read Sidney Sheldon when
I used to like read all the Jilly Coopers and stuff. So I was probably like
Jilly Coopers, Jackie Collins, because there wasn't really any when I was sort of growing up. That they didn't really have the sort of the crossover. You went from kids' books, so you went from Enid Blyton to
straight into
Jackie Collins. So it was quite an education, I can tell you.
I feel like I've been really lucky in my life that no one ever stopped me reading anything that I wanted
to.
No,
I didn't. My parents never stopped me reading anything.
I don't know whether that's maybe they just didn't know what I was reading.
I remember reading Virginia Andrews, Flowers in the Attic, and that is horrific.
Oh, dear.
And I was maybe about 12 or 13 when I read that, and I was like, oh, no. I don't. Yeah. Right. Before we go, so this is your elevator pitch for you all. So tell us about your books, what's coming next, and anything else that you'd like to tell us about. And do you want to go first, Neil?
Oh, okay. Well, there behind me, you can see A Perfect Time to Murder, which is the third book. A Quiet Place to Kill, which was number 1, and A Silent Way to Die, which was number 2. So that kind of wraps up that trilogy. They are, as we said before, about a seconded Scotland Yard detective who meets a air transport auxiliary pilot. She's got some. She's good at psychology. She's got a PhD, and she's got all these things that brings. I've described it as Kemba does that with his crime solving. She does that, but in doing that, they get to the same point and bring different pieces to it. What's next? 2 more cozies that I can't really talk about because although I signed the contract, it's not been finalised about how this thing is going to go yet. But that's likely to just be 2 books. But they are, and they're again historical cozy, but set in a different time period. I've written a 3rd book, which is kind of slightly crimey, but mostly not. But that was done as a labour of love. It's something that I've wanted to write for a while, and it's based on all my friends and a journey that we have to go through. But I've kind of taken bits of everyone to put it in there so that we're not those people. So my mates can't go, "Why? I didn't say that." Hopefully, there's another series I've got bubbling away in the background that I'd like my agent to get interested in and hawk around, but a bit busy at the moment. That's on the back burner. So a lot going on, a lot done, and a lot going on, and just loving the fact that for the moment I'm in this world because it's what I wanted to do forever.
Amazing. Kat, apart from having a baby and book 2, anything else planned?
Well, I think that's going to keep me busy. So I thought I'd grab this because it's still so new that I still sort of want to wave it around every opportunity I get. This is my first book, which has just been out for a couple of months now. So we've got the paperback of that coming out in February. Then book 2, which is in the same series, comes out next summer. So that's very exciting. So I'm just wrapping that up right now. And then I've got absolutely no idea. The plan is for this to sort of be a longer series. There are a few sort of, through running mysteries that will be resolved further down the series line. So I guess at some point I have to write book 3. I don't know when that's going to happen.
Do you have to get pregnant first?
Well, I mean, I guess that's my sort of, when people ask, what's your process? So I guess book 1's out, book 2's coming out next year, and we'll sort of watch this space for book 3. ... Yeah.
And Hannah?
I've got A Frightfully Fatal Affair. This is the proof, so it's not going to look like this. It might look similar. Frightfully Fatal Affair is coming out in October something. I think the 5th of October. I've got to remember that because I always forget to book it off work, and I always happen to be working when the book's release date. I don't know what's wrong. So that's coming out in October. That's the 4th book in the series, and then I'm literally halfway through the first draft of 5. And then there's a bunch of other stuff I'm not allowed to talk about. And then I've got another 2 Dinner Lady Detectives books. And then an asteroid's going to hit town and kill them all. And I won't write anymore. Or I'll write 50 more of them. I don't know. It's whatever. I'm not sure yet.
Well, if you're going to be like Agatha, like MC Beaton, you'll go on for what, I can't remember.
Do 2 a year for the next 40 years. I have to buy 1 bookcase just for my books.
That's your books, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so I'm not sure
so
after that, but yeah, there's some stuff going on that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Oh well, we'll watch this space for all of you, and if you any of you want to come back on and have a chat with us, please let us know, because we'd love to chat to you again. So the next panel is on at 7 o'clock this evening, and that is with Graham Bartlett in conversation with Jack Jordan, so that should be fun. If you can join us then, that would be great. Thank you, Hannah, Kat and Neil, for joining us this afternoon, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.